Welcome back to another video. This week I have something really exciting for you, and it's actually going to be a two-part series. So if you're new here, you may not know this, but I love doing subtle cosplays with a vintage twist. So I actually am going to be making my next cosplay in the next 2 weeks. And I like to make my cosplays really wearable and really true to my style. So the next project is going to be a Hades Gender Bend cosplay. I absolutely love Hercules, the Disney film. I am obsessed with it. I watch it all the time. You know this if you watched my Megara cosplay. I talked all about it in that video. When I made that cosplay, I knew I was going to be making this one as well. Here is my sketch. There's basically 3 elements to this cosplay. We have the jumper dress, or pinafore, I guess you could call it as well. We have the top, and then we have the little pin. For the jumper dress, I want to do something really simple. I want to do a basic sort of square neckline, and I want to keep the skirt full because I love a full skirt, but I don't want to make it, I don't want to get too crazy about it. I wanted something really simple. I'm going to be using this really beautiful cotton sateen. This is from Minerva.com. They sent it to me for free, and it's really shiny and beautiful, and I think it's going to be perfect. And then for the pattern, this will surprise no one, we're going back to our tried and true Gertie's Ultimate Dress book. I did think about using, so I did get this one for my birthday. It has a jumper dress in it. This one is Gertie's new book for better sewing. I feel like I need to toile it because I haven't used any of the patterns from here, and I haven't done, any alterations to make them fit me. And I have done that for patterns in here. I am going to be hacking some of the patterns in here to fit this idea that I have. So yeah, basically I'm just going to show you how you can change a neckline and things like that. So I hope that will be okay with you. For the top, obviously, I'm going to be using the most Hades gray you've ever seen. When I saw this, I was like, oh my God, it is perfect. So this is the cotton broadcloth from Minerva. We're going to be using, our tried and true McCall's 8161. I love the bodice on this pattern. It fits me like a glove, and I just really love it. I'm gonna basically make the same top that I made for my DAL cosplay, but I'm gonna change the back. So I'm gonna add a back button placket, and I'm going to be obviously adding the embroidery. I'm gonna do that by hand. And then obviously the third element of this whole cosplay is the little pin. I'm gonna do it in the usual way that I always make my pins, which is using felt and maybe beads. I don't know. I haven't thought about the pin all that much yet, to be honest. That's the whole plan for both of the next 2 videos. I am going to get started with the dress, so that's what I'm going to be making in this video. And then next week, I'm going to show you the top and the pin. The pattern I want to use for the bodice of my jumper dress is the strapless sweetheart bodice, but I will be changing it to a square neckline. This is much easier to do than to toile the square neckline bodice for me, and it gives me a chance to show you how to do it. I started by tracing the center front pattern piece. I made sure the center front line or fold is a straight line that goes past the neckline. Then I found the highest point of the neckline and drew a straight line connecting that point to the center front line. This ruler has a ton of lines, so I line up the center front line with one of them, and that gave me a straight line for the neckline that is perfectly perpendicular to the center front. Next, I transferred all the markings on the original, like the waistline, notches, and labeled the pattern with relevant information. I cut it out of my Christmas wrapping paper and I was ready to go, but actually I'm copying out all the pattern pieces anyway because I use this so much that the pattern is actually starting to get damaged. For the skirt, I'm going to use the 3/4 circle skirt, that was really hard to say, and obviously pockets. This fabric is just about wide enough to fit the skirt pieces, not quite, but so close. I'm not going to piece it though, because I'll have to level the skirt anyway, so it should be fine by then. I'll be lining the bodice with the same fabric, so I have to cut out 2 bodices. Whenever I have to cut out 4 or more pieces of something, I trace the extra with my chalk or whatever marker I'm using. You can see here I have traced a set of pockets and one with the pattern pinned. I'll be using this section of leftover fabric to cut out some straps, and now I could start cutting out all my pattern pieces. Once I've got everything cut, I'm going to start pinning stuff together. For the bodice, I start with pinning the side fronts to the center front with right sides together, making sure to match the notches. This is a princess seam, so it feels super weird while you're pinning, but it's very much a trust the process kind of thing. Then I pin the side back to the side fronts with right sides together, once again matching the notches. Lastly, I pin the center backs to the side backs with right sides together, matching the notches. And then I do that all again for the lining. My straps are just a long piece of fabric that's around 8 or 9 centimeters wide. I didn't really measure it, I'm sorry, but it's about 54 centimeters when I started. I will be trimming it later though. I just fold them lengthwise with right sides together and pin them to form a tube. And for the skirt, I pin one pocket to each side seam with right sides together. Now I'm going to sew all of those seams together, making sure to backstitch at the start and finish. This fabric is so easy to work with. I'm using an 80 sized needle and regular black polyester thread. I'm not going to bone this bodice, so next I trimmed the seam allowances of the bodices, and also I trimmed the seam allowances on the skirt of the section with the pocket. Then I pressed all of that. I started with the skirt pieces. I like to press the pocket and the seam allowances away from the skirt and then press them again in place. Using my tailor's hem, I'm pressing all of the seams on the bodices open. I've linked the fabrics, patterns, and all of the tools that I used in the description. And lastly, I flipped my straps right side out with the help of a safety pin and pressed them flat. The bodice seams don't need finishing because I'll be lining it, but for this skirt, I'm going to finish my raw edges with a zigzag stitch. Next, I pin the back skirt pieces to the front with right sides together. I pin the side seams and also the pockets. I also like to mark about 8 centimeters up from the bottom of the pocket side seam, which is where I'll be closing it. I'll be sewing around the pocket, then up the side seam to close the pocket, then down the rest of the side seam of the skirt. Then I trimmed the straps to the size I want them and pinned them to the bodice. I find the center of the strap and match that to the princess seams on the front and the back. Once I've got my straps pinned in place, I pin the lining to the bodice with right sides together, making sure to match all of my seams. And you guessed it, now I sew all of those seams. Then I trimmed the side seams of the skirt, including the pockets. I finished the raw edge with my zigzag stitch and pressed those seams. Now it's time to pin the bodice to the skirt with right sides together. I'm matching the side seams, making sure that my pockets are facing the front so I can stitch them to the waistband and leaving the lining of the bodice free. Then it's time to sew that in place, making sure I'm adjusting the fabric as I go to avoid getting tucks in my seams. Next, I trimmed the seam allowance of that waistband and pressed it up towards the bodice. I also pressed the zipper teeth away from the tape, which will help with the insertion of the zipper, which is our next step. I switched to a zipper foot, which really makes a difference in how easy it is to install a zip, and then I started sewing my zipper to one opening edge of the dress with right sides together, making sure to backstitch at the start and finish. Then I close the zipper so that I can pin the other side so that my waistline seams match. I match the seams and pin the other side of the zipper in place, then I open it up again and stitch it in place just like I did for the first time. I close the zipper again once it's sewn in place and press that. Now I can pin the center back seam of the skirt closed and stitch it. I always take care to match the seam line to the zipper seam line to help avoid lumps and bumps in that area. I just pressed that open because I used the selvages so I don't have any raw edges there. To finish the lining of the bodice, I clip the zipper tape so I can fold it in and also fold the seam allowance of the lining under. Then I pin the folded edge down to the zipper tape, making sure to hide the excess zipper at the top. I do the same along the waistline using the folded edge of the lining to hide my waistline seam. And then I'm going to slip stitch that in place by hand for an invisible finish. To finish the hem, I started by making some bias from scraps and offcuts of my cotton sateen. I ended up having to cut a bit more from my leftover length of fabric to have enough bias for this hem, but I always like to start by using up the scraps because they're not that useful otherwise, and it's a really good way to waste less fabric. Anyway, I sew all my little fabric strips together to make continuous bias. Next, I evened out the hem of the skirt after letting it hang overnight. It did drop a bit on some areas and I marked the same length from the ground and then chopped that excess off. Then I stitched the bias to the hem of the skirt with right sides together, folding back the edges of the bias at the start and finish. After sewing, I trimmed the seam allowances all around and pressed the bias. First, I press it away from the skirt, then in half, and lastly, I press it in on itself so that the raw edges are encased and there is no visible seam on the outside. Lastly, I like to slip stitch the bias by hand for an invisible finish, but you can do whatever you like best. And about 35 minutes of hand sewing later, I was ready for the reveal. Okay, that is the reveal. I'm really excited about it. I think it came out super freaking cute. It's so comfortable. I'm really pleased with it. I think the only issue I'm gonna have with it is that it's gonna crease very easily. I think it looks super fancy even though it's just like a cotton. Cotton sateen is like fast becoming one of my favorite fabrics to work with because it's just so soft. It's so nice, but it's also so easy and so like structured and crisp. Love it. I'm really happy with how the neckline turned out. I left a little bit of ease in the bodice, especially because I think I'm gonna wear this over things most of the time. So I wanted to have a little bit of like room in here to mix and match. Really don't have anything else to say, especially after last week that we had quite a challenging project. This one just went so smoothly and so easy and everything just went right and it was really refreshing. So yeah, that's it for this episode of our Hades cosplay. I'm really excited of how it's going. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next episode that will be coming out next Friday at 4 p.m. WEST, which is Western European Summertime, in case you're wondering what that means. Also consider subscribing if you haven't already. That would mean a lot to me. You can also consider following me on Instagram or TikTok. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video and I will see you in the next one. Bye!